Hello, everybody, and welcome to another week of Coast to Coast Lifestyles. I am Heather Kusipa in the Seattle, Washington area. We have Cassie Webb in the Mississippi area, and we have a special guest today from the Naples, Florida area, Shannon. So welcome to our awesome weekly adventure.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, ladies.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you. We've been kind of behind the scenes talking about how sometimes we don't even realize how much things vary from state to state. And definitely, I know Florida is different in some ways than our states. So,
yeah, y'all have been blowing my mind on how you do things.
Yeah, we've been doing a little bit of chatting before we started
here. I'm like, we're the Wild West compared to you all right now.
Yeah, it's for those who don't know, it's like real estate law changes potentially drastically from state to state. So that's one of the reasons we wanted a guest speaker, because Cassie and I, we've talked a little bit about our state laws, and we have some similarities and some differences that blow our mind, but it's not as extreme as some states can be. So I guess we can get a little bit more into it. I guess we'll kind of do more or less of a Q&A / conversational hybrid style for this today. So to start, how does representation work in each of your states, or is it more of a transactional state? So I guess, Shannon, we'll start with you.
I'm transactional. We are heavy on it. In fact, when you sign up for a listing agreement, almost the most common one is a transaction broker. So when it comes to fiduciary responsibilities, you all have been teaching me a few things about how different it is. But what it's benefiting me for is because so many of my clients and my buyers come from your states. So now I'm learning how I can better interact with them now, because I'm like, oh, this is how it works in your state, but this is how it's different here, which is awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
And good to know.
Yeah, I think it's... Oh, I was just going to say it's so important because just recently dealing with some agents and kind of buyers and sellers from the Florida area, actually in Alabama specifically, and how different our laws are. And so for perspective, for people that aren't familiar with the Mississippi Gulf Coast, so I'm 1 hour from Alabama and I'm 1 hour from Louisiana. We're in that little piece there of Mississippi. So we get a lot of buyers from a lot of different states and Florida. And, sometimes it's like, I've been in real estate for 17 years now. And it's like, I think that, people know what I know, kind of a thing. And even just in our conversation, even today in our conversations, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's so different. And that's why it's so important. Like if I were to buy or sell in a different state that I'm not familiar with, like I'm going to get an agent 100% because, it can be so different. And also for those that don't know fiduciary, there's kind of a acronym, old car. So I just wanted to clarify that real quick is when someone has a fiduciary duty to you, that's going to be obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting. So making sure you know where the money is and who it's with in that, and reasonable care. And also that can be competency in a way. Like I'm not operating in my fiduciary duties if I'm doing something that I'm not competent to do. So Heather, is that kind of similar to how your representation works over in Washington?
Yeah, so we, I feel like unlike most states, we have representation contractually with both the seller, and we can have a contractual relationship with a buyer as well. And yeah, when we sign a contract with our clients, we do have all of those fiduciary duties. And we kind of started talking about this earlier, but when it comes to representing both parties in the transaction for the same house, that's when it gets a little bit complicated, because then our fiduciary duties shift a little bit, because we can't be like, disclosure, for example, doesn't fully exist, because if I know a buyer is willing to pay this much and a seller is willing to take this much, I can't share that. So there ends up being a shift in what fiduciary duties I can actually present, which is why a lot of agents, if they're in that situation, they actually refer it out to a different agent whether it be in their office or a different brokerage, to lessen that complication and make sure both parties are still taken care of, which is really interesting.
That's what I was wondering with that, because I'm like, you guys must then do a lot of referral based business then, if that does happen, if someone comes in. Okay, this is like questions been in my head, is just like, so say you both have like representation, so you've got a listing and then you have a buyer's agreement. What happens like when the buyer comes and says like, oh, I like this listing? Like, what happens when you're actively working with this buyer? You've shown them 10 houses already, and then suddenly they want your listing. Like, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what I was talking about too, is if we have the buyer representation agreement already and we're actively holding a listing, then either I can talk to both parties and get written agreement from both parties saying, yes, it's okay if you act as a limited dual agent, that's totally okay. Or either party can say, no, not comfortable with that, I want full representation. And then at that point, we essentially void our contract, typically on the buyer side, void that contract and then refer them to somebody else, or assign an additional person to act as. In fact, we just got a new buyer brokerage agreement, and I believe on there, there's a section that basically says, in the event of a limited dual agency, this person is going to be the person that represents the buyer client. Yeah, so it's really complicated for sure. And a lot of people don't like to do it. There's very few agents that are confident and comfortable with doing that.
Yeah, it's very similar here. So basically, if I go to a listing appointment and I know I'm already in contract with a buyer that this would be the perfect house for them, I may actually talk to them, hey, I have a buyer that's already interested, and kind of address that up front and see, which way to go with it. But if I have a listing and let's just say I have an open house or someone calls off of a sign or something like that, and that buyer does not have representation, then typically I'm going to take them as a customer, which we don't have any, fiduciary duty other than honesty. We have to be honest, but
please be honest, guys.
not full disclosure, but honesty. Like, we can't lie, right? So but we do have property disclosures. We have to disclose if there's a material defect in our state, which is, I know, something that also varies state to state.
I want to get into that topic too.
So basically I would just they would be my customer. However, if I happen to have a listing agreement and then I happen to have a buyer that I'm already working with and their criteria changes and they are interested in my listing now, then more than likely it can change if they choose to based on that particular transaction, but more than likely it would be a disclosed dual agent agreement. And like Heather said, then it's just things kind of change, because it's like you said, Heather, it almost becomes similar to transactional, because obviously you can't act in full loyalty to two parties with different opposing best interests, if you will. So you really just kind of have to become almost more of a mediator than having the full fiduciary responsibilities to one client and the other as a customer. So is there ever a time, Shannon, when you are a fiduciary? Or
it is if you produce a role, like if you have a seller that says, no, I want you to have full fiduciary responsibility to me, which it does happen. You start to see that more kind of in our like higher end luxury properties, just because those kind of clients also want a lot of privacy and protection. Sometimes in those events, you're probably signing NDAs as well. But that's kind of where you're getting, or if you're working with particular buyers and that they want that like full representation. But other than that, no, mostly it's transactional. And most of the time, like most brokerages want you to have a transactional, because it gets hard and a little, I don't know. It's one where I was like, you say mediator. I'm like, yep, that's exactly what we are. Like we mediate everything. So I've never actually had one where I've had the full representation and responsibility for someone. I've always just been that mediator in everything.
Right.
In fact, I'm about to do a deal where it's like there's a possibility right now with it. Like I've got the photos tomorrow, but I also have a buyer coming for those photos. So I mean, there's a possibility it might be under contract by the weekend, and I don't really have to do anything, and I'm going to represent both sides.
Interesting.
As a transactional though.
Yes, as a transactional.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And here we're gonna we're either gonna represent the buyer and the seller's a customer, or we're gonna represent the seller and the buyer's a customer, or we'll be a disclosed dual agent, but we always represent someone in the transaction, or both, but at least one. So
interesting to me. Like even the definition, like transactional, just blows my mind. Like I can't even fathom our state being a transactional state. But even like the customer versus client definition change for you, Cassie, is really interesting, because for us, like a customer, the definition has kind of changed recently because essentially we only started requiring buyer agency agreement as of January 1st of this year. The form has always existed, just very few agents ever used it. But before that, like a customer was basically somebody that you're talking to try to get them as a client, but like the client is like who you're working for, regardless if it's dual agency or not. So even that definition is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Everyone is a customer for us. And then if you use the word client, you need to make sure like you can get flags saying, hey, you that's not a fiduciary responsibility. So you can't refer to your seller as your client. It's your customer, which I don't particularly like, because I feel like it doesn't sound as nice where you're like, oh, this is my customer instead of like my client. But so everyone, it's always a customer, especially when we're transactional. So you have to kind of like be aware of that.
So like if you call someone your client, like you better have the paperwork.
You have the fiduciary. Yeah, you have the paperwork and you have the responsibility to them.
Yes.
So it can get a little confusing. And I will if you look at any Florida agent and how they put themselves on social media, we slip up a lot. Like I'm going to tell you that.
Sorry, what are the repercussions if you do say it? Like, does somebody have to report you, or can somebody?
Someone's got to really have a bug up their, you know what, for like. Yeah. But this is where it is. It's like also because like in Southwest Florida and Florida in general, like the competition when it comes to real estate agents, we're like we are not a dime a dozen. We are like a dime every 3 people. Like there is just everyone has a real estate license in Florida. So the competition can be a little funny, especially now that the market shifted. It's just like COVID time, no one really cared. And now like if someone's not doing so well, then suddenly they're on your social media and they're angry and they're reporting you for stuff where you're like, what is this? So it gets a little interesting with that. So yeah, it can be a little catty down here. Let's just say that. The competition's fierce and it's petty.
Yeah. So sorry, the other question I had, so we were talking a little bit before we went live and started recording, but Shannon, you said something earlier too that I was really curious about, and how some things can differ from county to county. Is it legal differences, or is it just how they handle things are different from county to county?
It can be legal differences. It also can be just kind of like what is customary on everything. Like when we were joking around before we got on, I said, because you asked if I was over in Miami, and I say, no, I'm not in Miami. I'm on the other coast in Naples. I was like, Miami's Miami. Like that is like, I think when I say it's like a whole other animal, it's like, it's even on contracts and everything. It's a whole other checkbox. You check where you're in Miami-Dade because they have a whole other process that they do everything over in there. So it's a little bit different working on that county, but as opposed to like the other counties, like there's just like some nuances that happen to things. It's more like who pays for title. In my area, I work 3 counties. I work Lee, Collier, and Charlotte County. And in Collier County, it is where the buyer pays for title and closing costs. And so that's where the buyer can have the option of choosing the title company. But if you are in Lee or Charlotte County, the customary is the seller pays that. And so the seller is the one that chooses who the title and who the closing company is.
Yeah. In our state,
but it's also a free choice too. So then it gets even more confusing because in real estate, everything's negotiable.
Yeah, we play pretty nice over here. So we usually just the listing agreement by the listing agent, the buyer's agent, and the seller and the buyer. We'll all just see if we can kind of come to an agreement. Most of the time we can. One person cares or doesn't care. But if it came down to it, regardless, even if the seller is paying every penny of closing costs, they cannot dictate who the closing attorney is. The buyer has that right to choose who the closing attorney is at the end of the day if we can't come to an agreement. So
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So here in Washington, it's usually the listing agent who chooses the title and escrow companies, which we'll get into that next because I think that's another interesting topic. But we get to choose basically the title and the escrow companies. And the buyer has a right to say, no, I want to use this person. But at the end of the day, if the seller doesn't want to do it, then it can create a rift. It usually doesn't. It's usually like, oh, okay, well, I don't like that title company, but sure, we'll use them. So yeah, it's typically the listing agent for us.
Does not like get into a legal responsibility with you? Like if you, since you're the one choosing, like what if the title company messes up? Do they come after you for anything or like any kind of?
Mm-mm.
I mean, I just think about times because I'm like, I've had, let's just say I have a list of title companies I would wish to never work again with. And
we have
I think we all have those. So, but like, but it's also one where it's like, I mean, like, you know how sometimes you never know, like when there's an angry seller or buyer, I'm like, do they come after you if there was an issue with title? Because I mean, I've had issues where title came up where they filed something completely incorrectly. And I was like, well, I'm like, how do I know that they do that? This title company, that's not, I don't work with the clerk of courts, you know?
So at least I have not heard of anything like that personally. There has been issues where something has incorrectly or later pulled up on title. And in that case, it's up to that title company's title insurance on how it's going to be handled. So for me, for example, the reason I choose the title company that I prefer is because they have the best title insurance of any title company I've seen in our state. And so, for example, we had a massive issue last year, me personally, with one of my transactions, or at least massive to the situation. But I was actually selling my personal condo last year, and everything was clean on title. It was great. And we had a cash buyer. We moved to closing. About less than a week before our closing date, a lien was put on our HOA, which affected all of the units within the condo. And so there was a big deal about how are we going to handle this? What's happening? Like, we no longer have clear title. What's going to happen? Are we going to delay? Are we going to lose our buyer? What's happening? And because we were with the title company that I know, like, and trust so much, they're like, don't worry, we'll handle it. You'll be good to clear to close before Tuesday. And out of pure curiosity, I asked some other agents about the title companies they know or that they use. And I was like, hey, do you think your title company would have been able to do this? And in a lot of situations, they're like, that's risky. I don't know if we could have. I really don't know if we could have, or if they would have covered it. But for us, like, we had to pay basically like $100 filing fee. And then at closing, we got the $100 back.
Oh, wow.
It was just, it makes a big difference on who you choose, because will the issue be handled or not automatically?
Oh my God.
But title insurance, the long story short, to answer your question, title insurance is usually the one that helps remedy those issues. And if there is a massive issue, sure, it could probably go to court. I haven't heard of a lot of situations like that. So I don't know if that truly helps answer your question.
Yeah, it's the same here. That would really fall back on the title company and therefore the title insurance company. And now, that being said, you know, trust me, if someone wants to sue, they very well may.
They're gonna sue. They're gonna put everyone they want to. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, I think the probability of me going to court because I recommended a title company, it's like, if they do something wrong, I mean, I'm either going to either title insurance is going to handle it, and they've been super good anytime I've needed to, deal with the title insurance company. But it is one thing that people don't think about, Heather, is exactly that. Honestly, I didn't think about that for a long time. Is like, not only are you picking the title company, but you're picking who they write their title insurance through, which is super, super important. Everybody here, we all have like the closing attorney, the title company, like they don't represent the buyer or the seller. At the end of the day, like they're just doing their thing, right? They're transactional.
No, at the end of the day, if the title company has a lawyer or a lawyer is involved and the seller or the buyer chose, then they represent they represent who's paying. So that's
okay.
who they're responsible for.
Wow. All right. Yeah, not here. They're completely transactional here. So we're the opposite, Shannon.
Yeah. So we'll get that. So there's sometimes folks will come down. I actually see that a lot where I'm starting to see like people from like the New York, New Jersey area, because they're used to lawyers like being represented by like different ones. So you can have the option of, if you want someone to represent you on the title side, then you can hire someone. They're usually like a discounted price where they'll review all the paperwork and documents. There are some cases where that like sometimes I'm like, you know what, you might want to bring in just another party. I've only suggested that just because like I had bad experience with the title company that had been chosen and like that was going with. And I was like, you know what, you probably want someone to represent you and to make sure that all the verbiage is correct, just because like I just want to make sure that like, you know, like, because we were getting down into some very nitty gritty ones and I'm not going to pretend like I'm a lawyer. And so when it comes to addendums and anything like that, I'm like, we should probably bring in someone so we can have them properly write something.
Right.
But that was a case where it was like, because we have some interesting, unique properties here where it involves multifamily and vacation rentals and everything. So there was a lot more. It wasn't just a simple like single family home kind of transaction. There was more intricacies. Yeah. So with that happens, sometimes I'm like, you know what, like since seller chooses, you might want to choose your own representation, just because like I know that sometimes there can be issues on that end.
Interesting. Right. Yeah, with us, lawyers do not have primary roles within a typical real estate transaction. So you can get lawyers involved. Like lawyers are the ones who write the contracts that we as agents are allowed to fill in. And we can even add our own addendums and amendments and stuff like that. So the lawyers create those contracts that we as agents then fill in the blank of. And then lawyers can be involved with some sales, such as, estate sales and things like that. But otherwise, like our neutral third party is escrow, and that's not a lawyer. It's just a.
Oh, really? Because I'm like, I think like my transactions, I've had them like every 5 transactions. I at some point in time, the title company that I prefer to work with is also a lawyer, and we have to bring them in at some point in time just with some kind of question on something.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also, we have so many HOAs in our area. Like there's like, sometimes when you get down to like nitty gritty of like, so I feel like Florida, sometimes our properties are a bit unique when it comes to that. So it just like, I'm like, yeah, I involve a lawyer a lot sometimes, just because I'm like, how can you help me write this so it makes sense on like everything that I'm trying to include on this deal.
Huh.
Yeah. So, and my guy is awesome. He's like on speed dial. He will answer me within 24 hours. He's usually answering within 6 hours. And I mean, when I say answers, like he's answering with the answer to the question that I had. As long as I put in, I'm very detailed of like, this is the issue. This is everything going on. And he will get right back to you. It doesn't matter if he's on vacation. I mean, last time he did it, he was in the mountains and he's calling me and answering me, telling me, write exactly this on this scenario.
Yeah. My attorneys will jump in too. Yeah, for sure. When then there's a question or an issue. So our forms that we typically customarily use here, it's not required, but are provided by our state association of realtors. What about you guys? Is that provided by your real estate commission, or you each have your own, or
our local MLS does it?
Your MLS?
Yeah, which our MLS is not connected to NAR like a lot of people's is. Ours is just local. I don't know, Northwest MLS.
Yeah. Ours is with our Mississippi Association of Realtors provides. Now we do have a couple of real estate commission forms. Actually, the one disclosing agency, working with a real estate broker, is actually a state real estate commission form. And then our disclosures, because Heather, I know we were talking about that the other day. We have about 6 pages worth of disclosures, property disclosures, where you have to disclose anything that you know that is a material item, but the disclosures take you through about 6 pages worth of, have you had any structural issue, termite damage, easement issues, litigation, do you have a clear title, how long have you owned it, what's your electric bill, are you in a flood zone, like all that kind of stuff. So we do that, and then but if it's not on the form, you're still required to disclose it if you know it and it's material. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we're similar. We have a seller disclosure that's required of everybody except for estate sales. But ours is only like 2 pages of questions and then like a page of signatures and legal definitions and stuff like that. But ours doesn't, it sounds like it doesn't go to quite as much detail. It's more like, have you had potable water all your ownership? Do you know of any water damage? Things like that. And we also have a material disclosure requirements. But something I remember learning in a class, I don't know, a couple of years ago, is that different states also have different definitions of what has to be included with that material. So like some states have to disclose if a place is haunted, while another state might not have to. So like we are not required if it's haunted or whatever, but it does if it affects, like if it's a physical material.
Do you have to disclose that there was a death in the house? No.
So we do not have to disclose a death. In fact, we don't have to disclose a murder. However, if it's an infamous murder that could be stigmatized, we do have to disclose that. So
yeah, we have to do the stigmatized properties, but we don't have to do that. And that's that. And like the stigmatized has to be like big. Yeah, but I'll be honest with you, a lot of our stigmatized properties, if there was like something really bad there, they end up just tearing down the property. Like there's no like there was there was like a crazy one that happened and they ended up just tearing down a property. I was like, yeah, like absolutely no one's going to live in that. Like if they hear what happened in there, no.
Interesting. But
that's, yeah. And it's interesting where you all have like these disclosures. I was like, okay, so our disclosure is probably about 6 pages long. We have to disclose things, but we have like an option where people can say, don't know. And I was like,
yes, we have that too.
Yeah. And I'm like, I hate like, you know, it's like one where I was like, you do know, but you're not saying it, but that's, but it's not required. So we have that. Some brokerages require it, but it's not required for a transaction. So that's where you'll get it, where you'll say like it's required to do this, but it's not like even if the seller filled it out, it's not required for the buyer to even sign it or acknowledge it. So that's it's interesting. I'm like, you can do it, but you can like sometimes I'm like some people like I've had buyers straight up tell me I will not sign that. I'm not going to sign the disclosure. I see it and everything like that, but I'm not gonna sign it. And
we actually just got a big thing, and I'm not even gonna go into it today, but basically the Real Estate Commission and the Association of Realtors got into a big dispute over disclosures, and a lot of things changed because for a while we were actually responsible for what was on the disclosures, and then that changed, and it was a little bit of drama.
You as the agent were responsible for what showed up on it. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's they even changed. It's just anyway. I'm not going to get into it, but it was a little drama going on between the commission, the state commission, and the state association of realtors, and so anyway, now it's like we're still responsible to have one, like it's in our contract whether they're there or not, and anytime that the disclosures are not provided up front and or they're revised at any point, that the buyer has a 3-day rescission period that they can exercise. So we do have that, but we're not held like accountable. Now we still have to be honest. Like if we are aware of a material defect, like we have to be honest about that. But we aren't held like responsible for the seller's accuracy, if you will. So
Yeah.
See, that's where we get a little, like when I say, like, we'll get a little upset because, like, say if there's a deal and something comes up in our inspection period, because we have that actually built into our contracts as an inspection period where they can come in. And we've had, like, that's where I've been my negotiation. Sometimes if something comes up and it becomes like, hey, there's an issue with the roof or there's an issue with the plumbing, and the seller starts saying, I don't want to fix it. Then you start to push them like, hey, you know, you need to remind them that they're going to have to disclose this now.
Right.
Like, you're going to have to change your seller's disclosure. And there have been deals where I have sat and watched that deal. Like, you can tell me, I've watched it go right back active in that MLS, and you best be darn sure that I am watching that seller's disclosure. And I'm like, if you haven't updated that thing, I am going to call and I'm going to report you. Because I was like, that to me, I was like, that's not right. And I was like, you need to have that in the full disclosure. If there's an issue with the roof, especially when it comes to insurance here in Florida, you have to disclose that.
Yeah, that's the same here. If you know of something, it has to be said. It has to be documented. The interesting thing, and I'm sure I assume this might be similar. While we have to disclose material facts that we're aware of, we actually have it written in all of our contracts that we're also not liable for things we don't know.
Right.
Yes.
Which is, some of it's actually relatively new language. We've always operated that way, but some of our language has recently changed around it. So I wasn't sure if that was the same with every state or if it was like, you know, somebody else didn't.
Right. Yeah. It's like, you can't, if you're not aware, but at the same time, like, there's some comment, like, if it's something you can visibly see to the naked eye, then yes, you're responsible. But right in between me and Shannon, our states is Alabama. We sadly do not have an Alabama agent on with us today, or they could speak. I don't want to speak on their behalf, but to my knowledge, Alabama actually is a buyer beware state. And they have no property disclosure forms, nor, to my knowledge, the obligation to disclose defects. So it is completely on the buyer to do their due diligence and things, even if it is a known issue to the seller. Again, from my understanding, not licensed in that state, but so that's super interesting. And we do run into that because, like I said, I am less than an hour from Alabama. So we do run into that sometimes where property owners will be coming over here and it's different. And you have to kind of educate them on how different our states operate when it comes to disclosures. So
I think it's cool talking with you all too, because I'm like, it's interesting to hear the different processes in the states, but it's also one where it's like, I just want to say it's important, everyone, if you are working with someone, like if your client's moving down to Florida and they start bringing you in the deal, like just understand that sometimes that Florida agent's like doing the right thing. It just might not be your process. Like I've had so many deals where I ended up, I couldn't figure out why everything was going south. I was like, why is it every time I get off the phone with you, something happens and you're like, you're suddenly, there's a disaster. And I realized, I was like, they were talking to their agent. And I was like, your agent is, I'm like, they were from the Midwest. So I was like, your agent like knows the Midwest. They don't know Florida. They don't like, I'm like, we don't look for these things. These aren't like big issues. And I was like, but I'm going to tell you what everything we do need to look for. And that's where it's like, I ended up calling the agent and having a big heart to heart with them. I was like, I would love to involve you if you want to be on conference calls with me and all of that, but please stop having these side conversations because you're actually misinforming them. And that's, but it's great to know because I'm like, I love talking to the agents from other areas just because I'm like, you do help me so much because so many of my clients are second home buyers or they're from out of state and out of the area. So they're used to their states and not how we do things down here.
Yeah, I had a similar situation actually I think a year or two ago. I had a transplant from New York come in. And as far as real estate law goes, we are the most opposite of any state is New York and Washington. And she kept listening to her mom who had done a real estate deal like 20 years ago. And like her mom's word and her knowledge of New York real estate law was gospel. And I was like, you don't understand. That's not how that works here.
Yeah.
But it was just, we could not connect because she was getting so many different bits of information. And it eventually basically killed the relationship because a complete inability to listen to, this is our state, this is our laws, every single state is different, and you need to know that. No.
And New York does have some I've got a buddy who's up there, and sometimes I chat with him and I'm like, what is like his deals? I'm like, your deals would stress me out. Just stress me out. I was like, how long they take to close, how there's like this weird gray period. And I'm like, how do you not just like, I was like, but then I realized I'm like, no, you do just tear your hair out. There's no way you don't. Like they're a bit different over there.
Yeah, that's actually another good question is how long does it typically take for a typical transaction? How long is closing in your guys' states?
It depends if you're like a cash buyer. It can be about 2 weeks for a cash buyer. That's probably actually pretty common. 2 weeks to a month for a cash. And then for a finance deal, it's 30 to 45 days. I try to say more 45 days right now, just because sometimes like there's been some weird hiccups when it comes to underwriting, or what we're dealing with now. A lot of the hiccups when it comes to insurance, because my area got rocked heavily with a hurricane about 2 years ago that decimated large parts of it. And so when that happens, like, I got to say the whole entire state of Florida, insurance is just a nightmare. It can really make or break a deal. Like right now, when we're working with buyers, I have an insurance agent that's on call that will send me quick quotes, because sometimes I was like, there are some times where I send them the address and I was like, no, that address isn't going to work, just because based off of how much that insurance is going to be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Insurance is really like, and they're killing deals, especially when it comes to like financed ones. When it comes to roofs, they're very, very particular on the age of the roof. So that's like, they're deal killers, where they say, no, you can't do this. And then if a seller is saying, no, I'm not willing to fix it, then you kind of get into this catch-22 sort of situation.
Yeah.
Same here.
Interesting.
Yeah. Same here. We had Hurricane Katrina was a pretty major hurricane here in 2005. So a lot of roofs were replaced, obviously, right after the hurricane.
Oh, they're coming at the end of their lives now.
Yeah, and so people, it's really been a challenge, because a lot of insurance, if you can even get insurance, some of them they're just not writing at all anymore on the roofs, or some just the rates are outrageous, and potentially like actual cash value. But we've got people, I mean, I've had some people that were literally selling because they got a cancellation letter in the mail that said, replace your roof or we're not insuring you anymore. And because of the age. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. So, but our taxes,
we know what to deal with.
Yeah.
It's so interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, Heather, hey, Shannon, I know we didn't talk about this, but on our previous episode, we talked about actually every month we do market stats. That's next week. Right? We're doing our market stats. But my average price point is $250,000 roughly. And Heather, what's your average?
For my particular area that I operate, our median price point is about 1.4 million, give or take.
Yeah.
How about with you, Shannon?
Okay, it depends on what county I'm working in. Okay, so it's like it's more. I would say like it would probably be like this the $600,000 range, probably with that. So but it depends. And like if you're in Naples, though, Naples can kind of go real high end real fast over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so I would say that our average like insurance rate on a $250,000 house is probably $3,500 a year for insurance.
Yeah. Ours is a little bit more, but it heavily depends on exactly where you are in terms of a flood zone. Because with us, it's flood insurance. The state of Florida, I'm like, I joke around, I'm like, the whole state of Florida is a flood zone. So you just got to take it with that. But that's where it can start get down to the nitty gritty. It's the insurance. What kills us most is the flood. So if you're in a flood zone, that really affects things.
So if I say 3,500, it's kind of the average for the average house. That is for no flood. That's not a flood zone. So it's another, 600 to 6,000 if you're in a flood zone. So yeah. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
the biggest thing we have to worry about is our eventual earthquake that's going to break us up and California off from the U.S. We don't have anything else we have to worry about.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, you
And I was like, no, we get hurricanes. We've got some insanity. We've got hurricanes in Florida, man.
Oh yeah, I grew up in South Carolina, so very familiar with the hurricanes and all that fun stuff. But
I was like, I used to joke. I'm like, I usually just do hurricane parties, but I will say this last hurricane that happened, that was like, they say it was like 100-year storm, and I never in my life could like, I've never experienced anything like that. And I got to say this, I never want to ever experience anything like that again. But it also shows exactly how like, it showed me exactly all the great areas that you should be living in. It exposed the weak areas, the ones where I like, you know, I went around saying, I'm like, okay, that's his flood zone. That's going to be an issue. Don't go into this one. They have issues here. But it's also the power of how construction is and how powerful you should make sure that your buildings and everything are maintained to code. And that's where I was like, when real estate agents, I was like, we're also involved in our communities and the code and everything. I'm like, that's so important to like know how buildings are built and make sure that everything's securely like, you know, like, because that was huge of watching something, a house from the 1960s totally float away compared to a new construction that stayed there and stayed in place. That's something to be said on that one.
Yes. We have our neighboring state, Alabama has done a lot of work with the fortified roofs and all that we are still working on over here. So, well, we had so much to talk about. It was definitely one of our longer episodes. I super appreciate you guys. It's been super fun. Is there any kind of last words you wanted to say about any of the topics that we have talked about today?
Honestly, all I can think of is I feel like we need a part 2 of this because there's so many more questions I have.
Yes, there is. I'm like, I have a million questions. I'm like, you all are helping me. I'm like, but what's going on?
Yeah,
like, really. I was like, Florida, like, what are we
2.
doing over here? I was like, what are we doing, guys? This is wild.
Yeah.
I was like, they have so many rules in other states.
Oh my God.
I second that, Heather. I think we need to come back on. Like, we don't even, I feel like it's like things vary so much. Sometimes you like don't even know the questions to ask because you're like, I never thought about that might be different in another place. So guys, the takeaway for today is always make sure that you have someone familiar with your state. And that is why I'm like, even more now, I'm like, if I buy or sell outside of my state, I'm gonna have an agent for sure.
A local expert.
Yes. And yes,
I'm like, we're proving to each other why we exist. Like we need to exist for each other and for everything like that. Cause I'm like, and I also now know who I'm going to refer to if I have any clients into that area. Cause that's where I want to make sure that also I was like that. I'm like, I think I'm big on my referral based business just because so many of this where this is exactly where it is you want to make sure that you have someone in good hands that can be taken care of in other states. Cause it's so different. I was like, it's so different.
Yeah, definitely. Having the referral base in other states as agents is huge because then, if we have a client that's like, hey, my job is bringing me to Florida. Do you know who I should talk to? It's like, yes, I have Shannon, talk to her. She's awesome. Or I'm going to Mississippi. I have Cassie, go talk to her. She's awesome. Like it's huge because of the local area expertise. So definitely agree with that. But Cassie, you want to sign us off?
Yeah, no, that's it. It's been super awesome. We're definitely going to have to plan for a part 2. And we will be back next week, guys, for the market stats and check in and see how everything's going. So we will definitely see you then.
Awesome.